All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Janet Evans, Chair of the CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this meeting is being live streamed. You can find tonight's agenda and background materials on the CA Board's webpage, as well as in the description section of the YouTube live stream. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones and phones unless speaking. If you're in the room, please ensure your cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak, and I will call names in the order in which I see them. Anyone who's virtual, do we have anyone virtual tonight?
No, we got all 10.
All right. Everyone's in person, so forget that. There won't be any votes tonight, as this is a work session. And if you have any trouble hearing me at any time, please let me know. And I will now call the roll. Andy.
Present.
Sherry. Here. Ginny.
Yes.
Dick.
Here.
Lynn.
Here.
Tina.
Good evening.
Jess.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Ashley.
Here.
Lakey.
Here.
I am here. Okay, our timekeeper tonight is Tina Horn. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Tina moves. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Jess seconds.
No, is this the agenda that's in the packet?
This is the agenda that's in the packet.
Thank you.
So we have a discussion topic of closed meeting minutes that will not be included on the consent agenda. So can I have a motion to amend? Do I have to, Andy, do I have to get a motion to amend the consent agenda or just pull things off?
No, if everybody's happy.
Okay.
It's not even on here.
Yeah, I don't have it on.
It's not on here, so you don't have to do any amending.
Okay.
It's
So no amendment.
the agenda.
Except that I want to
The agenda that was
cover the
talking
other
about
ones
isn't
that
on
are
here.
on there, but.
Yeah, so we can amend that.
So let's, can I have a motion to amend the agenda to add a consent agenda for those closed meeting minutes that are not up for discussion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Andy. Can I have a second? Are you seconding?
No.
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion?
Yeah, how do we know which ones?
Why don't you list the ones that you mentioned? So everyone got these a week ago. If I could have read them when I got back on Tuesday at 2 a.m., I think anyone could have managed to read them between now and this meeting. Yes.
Okay, so you're talking about putting them, all of the confidential minutes from closed meetings on a consent agenda.
Correct.
And that is not something that fits with board policy and procedures. Confidential.
We have done it in the past, and it's perfectly able to be.
Not to my knowledge, because each one of these we have reviewed individually. We've done it in a closed session, and then we have taken a board vote. So a consent agenda is something for the meeting minutes. These are closed meeting minutes, and therefore everything is confidential. So I would like to make a motion that be removed.
There is a motion on the floor
you're right.
to put
You're
them in.
amending it?
Okay.
You're amending that motion?
It can't be amended.
Why not?
So if you've read Andy's email, we have done it before, and he posted multiple examples of times that we have included closed meeting minutes on the consent agenda.
After they were voted on.
This is not going to anyplace.
Dick?
Just because we've done something in the past doesn't mean it's the right way to do things. We have a policy that we don't vote on anything at work sessions.
We're not voting on it.
We are putting it on the consent agenda, which
It
is,
doesn't require a vote. So are you suggesting that we discuss every meeting minutes from the past 3
I
years,
think
whether or
that-
not it requires any discussion?
I think it would be a good idea if in closed session, we reviewed the minutes. There are a lot of them, there are 22 of them in there.
23.
Excuse me, see, there's another one I missed. But they're in there, and there is a history as to why these things were not approved when they should have been. I think this can something we can put off for a week or so. And I will also say that I spent the last 2 weeks working on the ethics policy, and it was only recently that I was able to find the closed agenda meeting, the closed meeting minutes. So this idea of just jamming stuff through without any discussion.
I'm not trying to jam stuff too. I'm trying to be efficient, Dick, and not discuss meeting minutes that are unnecessary to discuss. If there's no objection to certain ones, then I don't see any reason why we can't move forward with them and then pull out the ones. But obviously, people aren't prepared to discuss this tonight, and that's frustrating. Tina, Sherry, Jenny.
What are the risk and ramifications of waiting any longer to approve? I mean, how old are these? 2019? What are the ramifications to our risk management perspective to having this hanging out there?
Yeah, so having draft closed meeting minutes means that they're not a part of the official record. So it's essentially as if right now that those meetings did not happen, they can't be referred to. They're just simply not a part of the official record. And having 3 years of meetings that are substantial, like these closed meetings, not a part of the official record. Trying to say it lightly, but it's simply not appropriate. It's not good for procedure, and it does open us up for risk should anything happen in the future. And that's the simplest way I can put it.
Thank you.
Sherry?
Yeah, well, my understanding from past years is that, first of all, going back 3 years, I believe we did review some of the closed minutes, and some of those were released. So there may be some confusion about what remains to be looked at and what was actually examined and voted on. So that requires a little bit more work. The other thing is the policy of the board is to look at the closed minutes for the year at the time of wrapping up at the end of the year. You don't go back 2 years or 3 years or 10 years.
Well, you have to if you haven't approved them.
Excuse me, I'm speaking. It makes no sense to go back to it because whatever is closed is closed. It's over. It's past the time of voting. It's just a closed meeting minutes, and those are held by the board. So I don't think that this represents the kind of risk that you may be talking about.
I don't know. Is that a question? That's
No,
a fine
it's
point.
not a question. It's. I'm just stating it.
Jenny?
Yeah, I would have a question for Wes and then a comment. Wes, doesn't the board have an option of saying X minutes, whatever the date, I'll make up a date, June 3rd, shall remain closed, or we want to open them up to the public?
Can I just clarify one thing? These aren't even approved minutes yet.
I know, but
so
that's-
you can't open or close them. They've never even been approved.
But that would be part of the vote, correct? We can decide that after we approve them, we want to open them up to the public.
Well, if somebody proposed that, sure, and I believe that motion has been made in the past.
Yeah, so my point is, we're not even getting this option tonight on any of these.
I'm not the one giving options tonight. I'm just giving.
Yeah.
If we approve minutes, that does not mean that we cannot vote to release
Okay,
them.
my second suggestion, because we're going to spend a lot of time on this, and it's sort of not what some of us expected would happen tonight. I would just respectfully suggest that we take a look at our calendars and come up with a date. If the 21st doesn't work, let's come up with another
Okay,
date
we don't
that
have to
week
do
or
that
the
right now.
following week. What?
We don't have to do that right now.
Well, no, we don't, but since we have this thing on the table, I'm just trying to offer an alternative to this continuing debate over this so that we can move on and really accomplish something in a week or 10 days. I think that's your
Is everyone going
goal.
to actually read them between now and
I
whenever we have a
think
closed
that's your
meeting?
goal, and I think that would be the commitment from the
Well,
board.
It should have been the commitment for tonight.
Well, you know, there was a lot of
I should give you a little history on this, and
No, please don't, just
well,
stick to the facts.
there's a
please.
context. There's a reason why these things did not get signed, and I can fill people in on that, or if you want to shut me up, I'll shut up. But I can tell you why.
Is it relevant to whether or not we're putting anything on the consent agenda tonight?
Yes, it is. I am trying to explain why we went for 3 years without approving some of these minutes. Does that interest you at all?
Go for it.
Okay. Because you were in the meeting where this happened.
I'm fully aware, so I don't need the context, but perhaps some other board members.
Well, there are a lot of people who are new here. Back when Andy was chair and I was vice chair, we had an agreement that I would write the minutes. And I did that for some time. And the problem we had, I would write them and then Andy would just check them. And then they would go to our former counsel, who would sometimes edit them. And sometimes edit them rather radically. And there was one meeting in which she took several paragraphs out. And because we just didn't get to it, we didn't approve those minutes, and then that kind of became a habit. Now, I think, yes, we do need to approve these minutes. One of the questions, one of the philosophical questions, is how much goes into the minutes. There's one school of thought, and
I would actually prefer not to get into the school of thoughts on what goes.
well, there is a school of thought as to what goes into the minutes. One of them is that it simply says we have a meeting, and these were the votes. And the way I was writing the minutes is there was some record of the discussion, because sometimes people go back to those minutes and want to know more than just what the vote was. They want to know what was discussed, what the positions were, why people voted what they did. There needed something in there. Our former counsel's position was that you don't want to put anything in the minutes, because if you ever have a legal problem, the less you say, the better. She wanted to keep everything ambiguous. That's the philosophical question about what should go in these
I
minutes.
think that still applies. I think that still applies.
And that's why I think we need to have a discussion about the various minutes and what should go in them. And that's all I'm asking, but it's going to take some time.
Eric?
So here's my recommendation. It sounds like we're going to need to have a closed meeting anyway for some of these minutes. So why don't we just have a closed meeting for all the minutes and just make it more efficient?
And here's my issue with that, is that we as a board are responsible for being prepared for our board meetings. And if people cannot be prepared, then they should announce that before Tuesday of the week of the board meeting. So that's where I'm frustrated, because no, I don't want to sit there and go through every single one of these meeting minutes in a closed meeting, because everyone had them to read and everyone could have read them prior to this meeting. So that's where I am frustrated, because there are very clearly ones that we do not need to review for any reason. And I really personally don't want to waste my time doing it unless it's absolutely necessary. Sherry and then Jess.
Well, but my understanding is that these were not supposed to be in this meeting, and that this was suggested to put them on the consent agenda without having announced it, just sort of at the last minute.
I believe Lakey sent an email last week that indicated that.
Right, but the BOC did not agree to do this.
The president and chair have the ability to change the agenda without the BOC.
But then the agenda has to be approved.
by the board.
Yeah, so there.
Which is why right now there's a motion on the table to add it to the consent agenda. So why don't we vote on it? And if you want to vote it down, then let's go for it, because I think we've wasted enough time already. Jess?
I just wanted to say that while we've been going back and forth, I went into the list of all the board policies, and I did not see anything that indicated that these had to be reviewed in a closed meeting.
All the board policies are not listed.
I would love if you have board policies that are not included here, maybe they should be shared.
Well, I think Wes is working on that right now. He's gone through all of the policies, he's put them in order.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to vote on whether or not to add those meeting minutes that were not related to ethics violations or Symphony of Lights onto the consent agenda. I'm going to take a roll call vote. Andy?
Yes.
Sherry?
No.
Ginny?
No.
Dick?
No.
Lynn?
No.
Tina?
Yep.
Jess?
Yes.
Eric?
No.
Ashley?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That leaves 1,
5-5.
2, 3, 4, 5. 5-5. Motion fails. Congratulations, everybody. All right, moving on. Can I have the approval of the agenda as it stands? Are there any objections?
No.
Okay, we have no residents signed up to speak tonight. So our work session topics, we will be moving on to minority business enterprise program policy provisions.
So as we noted in an email communication about the board packet, we provided the strike-through red line version of the existing policy with the changes that were presented last time. We did not have any additional feedback from the board, so we didn't intend to present anything further this evening. Nothing has changed since what our discussion was the last time from the staff side.
Thank you. Any comments on the policy as it stands? Eric?
I do have one comment. So I noticed we have sub-goals in the policy, which is new. Howard County does not have sub-goals. So, and it seems like we're trying to mimic Howard County, and Howard County is a lot larger than we are. So the question I have is, does it even make sense to have sub-goals? I mean, we have enough problems meeting the main goals.
I can comment on that because it was partially my suggestion. So sub-goals came from the state, and federal also has it, so it was really just part of best practices. And again, these are goals, so it's something to strive towards, and I think it's something that can be reassessed as we're working on this throughout the year. But the sub-goals help us to work towards working with businesses based on how many are currently registered with Howard County. That way we know that it's equally spread across the board based on the disbursement of those organizations that are already registered as minority businesses.
Because one of the issues I have, and I think one of the residents spoke to at the last meeting, is the sub-goals don't necessarily line up with the demographics of Howard County or even Columbia. So I'm a little concerned about that aspect of it.
Oh, you're talking about when Sherman commented. Yep. Yeah. So do you want to go ahead?
They line up with the demographics of the businesses in the county.
Right.
Sherry and then me.
Yeah, and we had talked about this, and the other thing about the sub-goals is one of the suggestions, we thought maybe this could be something that could be updated every 2 years to take a look at what the newer statistics are per the changing county statistics. So if you're concerned about keeping up, that's one of the things that we do not have originally in the plan.
Yeah.
So that would be a way of keeping up with things and keeping pace.
I agree with Eric on this one. I think that sub-goals, while that may represent the demographics of businesses in Howard County, we don't know if those are businesses we would actually do business with.
Right.
So when I see like a 1%, a 2.5%, to me that represents a problem for us, because if we set these as targets, we're going to be held to these metrics, and I have a lot of concerns. So at the very least, I think we need to do a range, and like if it's a 0.1%, it needs to start at 0 and go to something, because I think it puts us in a difficult position. While it's a noble goal, I'm not sure. I think as soon as we put this in writing, it becomes something that we are held to, and I'm not sure that that's a realistic expectation around some of these tiny minorities.
Good point.
Tina?
I will note that staff is the one who came up with that schedule based on their expectations.
Right, and I think that was based on feedback from the subcommittee. So, I mean, I
Right.
appreciate the effort, but I'd like to talk about how we could potentially soften that. Ashley?
Yeah, I think ranges make sense. I think sub-goals are important because if we don't have them, we can say that we're reaching our target of 18 to 23% eventually by just giving all of the procurement to women-owned businesses, right? Like, we're checking that box, and we're not giving a breakdown of saying we've accomplished hitting African-American and Asian-owned and et cetera, if we don't have sub-goals to show the other demographics.
How's Howard County handle that problem?
Pat is on the line,
because-
so maybe he knows.
So they don't, they're not tracking sub-goal, so it's not there is not a problem for them per se, because there's not a target for them at the sub-goal level.
Howard County has a number of businesses registered. It's not a procurement spend for them. It's just a number of minority businesses that are registered with them.
By category.
Right.
Andy?
No, I was thinking of what Janice said, and makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you look at the state and federal government, they have lots and lots of contracts. And so 0.5% of a lot of contracts is a lot of contracts. But we're such a small organization
Right.
that you're right, even 1% is going to be a really small number. And so, maybe ranges for categories might work better, just because we have so few contracts, comparatively speaking, to the state and federal government. I can understand why Howard County also doesn't track it, because of the same reason. They have contracts, but the volume isn't there to make the percentages reasonable.
Eric?
Yeah, so one comment on ranges, we already have a range. It's the number to infinity. So to have a...
No, to me, it's 0 to the
or,
number.
or it could be 0 to the number. So if it's 0 to the number, then the range is, then you might as well just get rid of the goals altogether and just track it. And if it's the number to infinity, then you're not adding it. Then adding an additional range is not really doing anything. So I would feel more comfortable taking out the sub-goals altogether, because no matter what, you have a range. It's just where your endpoints are.
Justina, Andy?
So I think my comment on this is I guess I don't really understand the harm in setting a goal, even if it's not attainable. To me, the question would be, why not, right? You try for it, you realize that it's not attainable because there aren't enough businesses or there aren't enough contracts, and then you adjust. But I like the idea of having the intent of, having sort of a lofty goal, and if we don't meet it, then we look at why. Why didn't we meet it? What were the barriers? And, I don't know that, I guess my question in that is there harm caused to the organization if we set these goals and we don't meet them? What does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, does it reflect badly on us? Like, why, a goal is a goal. You don't always meet it. So I guess that's just the way I see it.
We haven't met our goals yet. Does anybody feel like we have a black eye because of it? Nah. I mean, we have some
I'm just saying, this
tarnish.
is going to make it even less likely that we meet our goals.
Yes,
I think
right.
that the leadership change is going to make it even more likely that we will meet it, because based on what we have already heard, there's movement. So that's good. And I do want to be so bold as to remind the board, this is Columbia. We were founded on some of these ideals, and trying to weasel out of them is not a tack I think we should be taking.
Okay, weasel out of, I think, is strong language.
It is strong
honestly.
language. I'm a little
I think that's not
frustrated.
what I was suggesting.
Right.
No, I'm
Having
not-
come from a statistical and market research background, I can
And I'm
tell
not-
you that there are complicated
Janet, if the shoe
algorithms.
doesn't fit, don't put it
I
on.
agree
I
with what
wasn't
you're saying.
talking about you.
I'm saying, having goals, okay.
Having
Andy?
goals is lovely, it's important, it's valuable. We are Columbia. We're supposed to walk this talk.
So I think I see two possibilities here. One is you do like African American, women, and then other, put them together, which would give you 5%. So that way, at least, you'd have a goal of 5%. And then the second thing is, is what would be good is if maybe we could collect statistics for maybe about two years and just kind of see how it breaks down in the future. And as you said, maybe in 2 or 3 years, come back and review this and see if maybe we can break out. But I was thinking that way, at least you get what I'll call reasonable percentages. You get kind of like 4, 5, and 7%.
So question for staff. So I'm curious your take on this because, I can't remember if it was Jess or Tina, we have not met our goals typically and, we track them. However, if breaking it down to this level, I'm curious how you feel because I feel like once you put something in writing, then it can be used in a way that you maybe don't intend it to be used. Goals, I think, are lofty, and I think that we should target diversity, but I think we need to do it in a responsible way that does not somehow put the organization in a bad light.
Yep.
So may I? So actually, I was going to propose what Andy suggested, because I do think that so I think the goals are aggressive for us, but we're already, making good progress, and we're gonna make excellent progress. And so, but I think that it would be helpful to not have this level of granularity, because I do think you're right, Janet. It will be hard if the vendors in Howard County in these categories are not what CA buys, then we would struggle. So to group them might be helpful.
Eric and then Sherry.
So I'm not quite sure how we're planning on grouping them, but I've got some concerns there. If you start grouping demographics together, I mean, it could create some really weird. It could make things look a little weird, and people could have an issue with it. Why are you grouping these two groups together and this group is separate? I think that could raise a whole slew of problems that I don't think we want to get into, especially considering that I'm not aware of any other organization at any level that groups demographics together in whatever way we plan on grouping them together.
Sherry?
Yeah, I think the idea of this policy is to expand opportunity to groups that have been underrepresented. We had a long talk about that. And if we're not looking at groups that have been underrepresented and we're not getting that statistical information in, then we have no baseline and we have really nothing to work from. As far as the goals are concerned, and again, judging over the past 10 years, we didn't set up a lot of structure with the previous policy. And that may have been one of the weaknesses, because we started with a 12%, and now we're saying 10 years later, we're setting a 15% goal. And the important thing here is that this is not a cap. And this was something I was expecting people to raise some questions about. I really want to make sure that in our discussion about this, we did not, want these yearly percentages to be perceived as caps, so that these groups that are delineated are in effect competing with each other to get into that 15% group. This is a baseline meets or exceeds. And I think Susan included that language, attain or exceed. So this is expansive. This is about opening opportunity. So we may see those numbers do something very, very different because of the greater efforts that are being made now by the staff, which I think are fantastic. There's a lot of movement now.
Eric?
Well, I think there's I like the idea of reporting these statistics. I love data and definitely want to see more reporting on this. But I think there's a big difference between reporting statistics and having a lot of goals. I think in the past we had a singular goal and we weren't able to meet that, and we're still not able to meet that. So going from a singular goal to lots of goals, I think is problematic for the organization. I'd be a lot more comfortable if we just focused on the singular goal and let staff basically do their job and try to expand opportunity as they are able to.
Dick?
Well, keeping in mind that these are aspirational goals, there's no enforcement, there are no consequences. It seems to me that we're kind of getting too far into the weeds where we try to break these things down into all kinds of subcategories. I think our major goal is the important one, and that is to increase minority participation. And let's keep that a simple, straightforward goal.
Yep.
And I would love to see some kind of enforcement mechanism to make sure we stick to it.
Any other comments? Can I get a sense of the board of who is leaning toward retaining subcategories and who believes that they should at the very least be consolidated?
I don't want them.
I got it.
Oh,
worse, so
yeah,
I don't
I'm
know
gonna
which.
give you.
I don't know
I
which
was getting
one.
to that. That's why-
Like,
I don't want them.
All right, so anyone who feels like having them is not a problem at the granularity that they're at, please raise your hand. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so it's split. Yeah. So I don't know where to go.
Next subject.
Well, and I do want to be clear, from a staff perspective, for you to vote at the next meeting, we do need that guidance.
And we don't.
We can't.
I think the nice thing about this is whenever, we get the report out on finances and procurement, we can see, oh, we haven't spent any money with any Native American businesses. What's the reason for that? And then Pat or Susan can tell us, oh, it turns out there are actually no Native American businesses that are registered with Howard County or with Maryland or with federal that qualify for this. So we need to reassess this sub-goal. There's going to be a little asterisk at the top that Columbia Association isn't able to pursue opportunities with Native American businesses at this time, but we're going to be on the watch out as new companies are registering for this, right?
Couldn't we do that without having?
Sure. So maybe then we're tracking to these measurements, right? So like clearly these numbers should be
fully
somewhere on the
supportive of
page, right?
tracking.
So like maybe it's then it's not called a goal, right? But like there's something that these numbers need to be represented on here so that we have some context of how many are registered with Howard County, what that's represented for Columbia Association that we can actually pursue. And then that way we're not over committing to just women-owned businesses, right? Like we want to ensure that we're purchasing with African-American owned businesses, that we're not discounting some other demographic by just having one lofty goal.
So I would like to just throw this out and see how it sticks. Following up on Andy's suggestion for female African-Americans, since those are the largest percentages. I hear what you're saying about other, Eric, but I think it's a typical thing to do when tracking demographics to throw all the smallest percentages into another category. So we could or could not. I mean, I think that one could go either way. However, as not our, our target goals per se, but we acknowledge that for the next 2 years, we will track to these other demographics so that we can recognize where there are opportunities and where there aren't opportunities. And I feel like that positions us in a way where we can focus on the largest percentages for now, but make sure that we are looking at these subcategories on an ongoing basis and reporting out.
But not have as a goal.
Maybe there's a threshold that we put in place that once the population of registered businesses has a substantial number, that's whenever they become a separate category. That makes sense, but we definitely need to track to this, right? Because if we don't start with that data at a granular level, then we're not going to be able to compare it 5 years down the road.
Eric, Jenny,
So here's my recommendation. We track all the sub goals, and then what we do is just have a reference point. This is the percentage of businesses in each of these sub goals currently registered in Howard County in Columbia, and just have those reference points tracked along with the sub goals, and then we can do the comparison as the years progress. And then they're not goals; it's just data being tracked, and we can track it against a benchmark of of the percentages that are currently registered, and that gets reported.
Jenny?
Yeah, well, I guess the original goal, we could go above the 12 or 15%, but I'm just wondering if we have just a lot of people in one category that apply, and they had really a low goal. what happens? I mean, that just happens to be the category where disabled people have applied, a lot have applied, and I just think what Janet and Andy are suggesting and Eric makes more sense for the time being, frankly.
Lynn?
Yeah, again, I just think having the names being recognized as a group is still important. You know, it can be done as part of an other, but I think that, you know, people who belong to these groups would like to feel included. To just be included as other is dismissive.
Are you opposed to tracking versus setting goals for small percentage?
Oh, no, not at all. Tracking is.
Okay, so we're up to
But I
6.
just think, you know, again, I think I would still like to acknowledge the groups that we're tracking.
Tina?
I want to be careful about our understanding of some of the individual groups that we are tracking. Women-owned businesses can be owned by Black women, and so there are some cases where we will be able, depending on the business, I think, to double count. This is a woman-owned business, this is a Black-owned business, this is a woman-owned, Black-owned business. I will also note that as a society writ very, very large, the first time we tried this with affirmative action, the number one beneficiary was white women. And so I think being very careful to track, you know, not failing to track will lead to unintended outcomes, I think.
One point of clarification, I was doing some research on this. I believe that the women-owned businesses, that category is just non-minority women-owned businesses, so there is no double counting there.
Okay.
And also with regards to Lynn's comment, I think if we're just tracking and we don't have goals, then we don't need another category. We can just track all the sub-goals, and that makes it a lot easier.
Janet, we're at time.
Janet.
Thank you.
Then that comes back to, well, why don't we just have goals? We're tracking it anyway.
So,
Thank you.
clear as mud for you. I believe what I heard, so I'm going to summarize here. I believe what I heard is we want to track all of the sub-goals, or all of the subcategories. However, our goals for the next 2 years will be set to minority and female-owned, or I guess Black and female-owned, as the 2 largest percentages in Howard County. The subcategories we will track to make sure that we are making an effort to reach and represent those categories as well without stating them as overt goals. Dick, Eric, Sherry.
I just want to say I think Janet has a very good solution.
You could have just given a thumbs up. Eric, the
Yeah, question on your solution though. It sounds like we're only then having goals for some subcategories and not others.
yes, the majority, so that's...
I would prefer just having those sub-goals and just having...
Okay, well, we can vote on that in the next one, but I think, Sherry.
Yeah, I guess that was my reaction also. I don't think we're focusing on just 2 groups because they're the largest. I think the whole point is expanding to the smallest subcategory groups that represent the diversity of this county and how things have been changing over time. So we don't want to knock anybody out, and we certainly don't want to not solicit certain groups. We want to solicit as many possibilities and open up as many possibilities as we can. So maybe we want to call it something like benchmark metrics. Let's just think of another way of including this tracking so that it goes into the policy so that it's clear that we're going to be looking at this broad area. I think, you know, again, that was part of what was, those metrics were missing last time. And I think it didn't give us a really as clear a picture as we will get going forward. So if you can think of another name, I'm perfectly happy to go with another name.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the subcategories? Are these percentages based on dollar value, or are they based on number of businesses?
Number of businesses.
So we don't even know how large or small these businesses may be. Despite Eric and Sherry's dissent, I believe the rest of the board is in alignment on the previous statement. Is that
Which statement?
Which, so yeah.
my statement about, I give up?
Okay, so
Statement about giving up.
in quick summary, I would just say that what I took away from Janet's comments, if everyone agrees, in terms of what the staff would be looking at to make some edits in the policy, is that we would keep goals stated as goals for Black-owned and female-owned businesses, and we would be tracking and name the categories that we're tracking, but we would be tracking the other categories that are currently listed in a chart, all with goals stated. So again, taking goals to only Black and female-owned businesses, and then tracking all other subcategories called out individually as is currently stated in the document.
Ginny, then Eric.
Yeah, I'm concerned. Your original idea, I thought, was we would up the goals and then we would track these categories, and we may even wind up adding others as you begin the tracking process, but that we would not have goals, period, at least the first year, just to see how it's going and not be held to a goal, or we would change it from 0 to 7, because if we don't meet it, we're going to get a lot of flack. And to just pick out 2, I think we're going to have other groups asking, why not me, especially if they've seen this draft. So I think that compromise could be a mistake. I like the first idea.
These are the groups that are registered with Howard County's Minority Business Program.
These are what?
These are the groups that are registered with Howard County's Minority Business Program.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is.
So what other groups do you think would come to ask that aren't, like, it would have to be an official
That's not
registration?
that's not the point. My point is when we only select 2 and
got it.
eliminate the others, we're going to get flack from the others saying, why did you go and do that, especially if they've read this? So the best idea, I think, is what Janet, and maybe it was what Andy and Eric was saying, and that I thought we voted on, is to just simply go with upping the goal to whatever it is, and not have goals for individual things, but really hold ourselves or the next board and the staff accountable to presenting in a year or 6 months or whatever. Where are we? What's the progress based on these categories, but not put it down as the goal.
Susan, did you have something about it?
So
Is that as clear as mud? Thank you.
In just giving this
Sure,
further
words.
thought as you're discussing it, I feel that if the board wants to keep sub goals, they should be in these categories, because these are the categories that the state has in its
it's fine.
policy as well. So just to make sure that we're modeling something that
That's fine.
is familiar and enforceable, I think
That's
would be
fine.
appropriate.
Yeah.
If it's not something new, I don't want to hear it.
Really quickly, I think
Should I make an amendment?
I think it's just, I just think it's really dangerous to have,
We don't
treat
vote.
certain groups in one way and other groups in a different way. If we have goals for some groups and not goals for other groups, I think that's very dangerous.
I'm going to leave it at this. If staff is comfortable with what's proposed here, then
What?
I'm good. Tina.
What flack have we got for not meeting the goals in the past? Because I hear a lot of concern that we're going to get flack, we're going to get flack, we're going to get flack. I want to know what flack we've already gotten. Because I haven't seen, despite significant efforts on my part to raise some flack, I haven't seen, I think we should be getting flack. I don't think we're getting flack. I don't know what flack we're getting.
Can I make a motion?
No, we're moving on because we're not.
We
making
don't
a work
vote.
session.
What?
It's a
We
work
don't vote,
session.
it's a
we're
work
not
session.
voting.
Oh, sorry about that. Never mind.
Okay, moving on to the emergency cash reserves.
Okay, so Susan Krabby, our CFO, is going to give a quick highlight, but again, the information was included in your packet. She's going to walk through it at a high level and kind of overview level in more detail. In quick summary, I just want to say that we feel very fortunate to have been the recipient of federal aid through the Employee Retention Tax Credit Program, and really getting that aid in combination with the timing of receiving that aid at the very end of our fiscal year really makes the recommendation that we have put forward, that frankly is unexpected to be able to make this fiscal year, a very positive ability to contribute to our emergency cash reserves. So, Susan?
So I've just put in slide format much of the material that's in the packet, and I thought maybe it would be useful to go through it. And also, because there are new board members who were not part of the decision-making process for establishing the Emergency Cash Reserve Fund last year, I thought that would be useful. So back in FY21, the CA board agreed that certainly cash reserves make sense. We just were grappling through a global pandemic and a resulting economic crisis. So in FY21 in April, the board approved a cash reserves policy. And as part of the FY22 budget process, the board approved initial reserves funding of $2 million. So that was, the $2 million was the staff recommendation at the time, but actually the initial staff recommendation was $5 million, and we backed off of that out of concerns about not being able to fund that in FY22. So for those of you who weren't part of this, and just for the refresher, we looked at sustainability in the context of reserves. We did a lot of research. We actually had a consultant help us out with this, and we worked to apply a data-driven, risk-based approach to these emergency reserves. So we developed a risk matrix. It identified the risks. We estimated probability and the impact of occurrence of those, and then we used that to determine the initial reserve targets. So just to sort of get everyone on the same place, risk is the chance of something happening, and it's measured in terms of probability and the impact, and it can adversely or it could positively affect the organization. So it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's basically a neutral, but it would impact CA's ability to achieve its long-term operational objectives. So we applied an enterprise risk management approach to this and developed a matrix. So the assumptions, the nature of the assumptions have not changed, but I've updated some of the data. So we looked at a component of 60 days cash on hand, basically 60 days worth of total cash expenses, less depreciation, and we updated that for FY22 estimate. We had originally used the 22 budget. We looked at annual charge revenue. That's the single biggest revenue driver for the organization. What would happen if that was impacted in some way? And we evaluated at the time a potential 10% decrease in valuation. Originally, we had estimated that the likelihood of that was 75%. I backed off of that in the context of the housing market and the stable valuations to 40%. So that went down. Another risk, one of the things that has sustained CA in the past from a working capital perspective is a commercial line of credit. That expires in June of 2023. Now we would expect that it could be renewed, but in the event that it might not, it needed to be factored into this matrix. And then there's a potential for uninsurable legal expenses, and I based that on our bench, several of our insurance coverages that are have either particularly high deductibles, or the industry itself is challenging, or there's just some governance or operational risks that increased our exposure. So looked at cyber, employment practices, D&O, and property flood damage for property, because we've seen that. We've experienced some of those uninsured or uninsurable incidents. So I did increase that likelihood from 10% to 40%, and I moved it forward. I think it's a more time and critical and urgent need than I had originally projected, so I moved it forward a year. And then finally, because the whole amount increased significantly, and the organization has other cash needs, we want to improve and increase our capital investment. We're already seeing kind of a catch-up on some of our capital spending that's been in the pipeline, and we're seeing costs increase in every single contract that's come up for renewal, every single one. So the total amount has increased, and we pushed out the total funding for 2 years. So this is teeny tiny little numbers. I hope that you got to look at it in the packet, but it just shows where this matrix falls out now. So that the minimum, the fourth column right in the middle there, minimum at 430.22 is now $5,133,000, when last year it had been about $2 million. And the total is almost 17 million in 2028, and originally it was about 13. So the considerations for funding, as Lakey pointed out, we have a favorable cash position at the end of this year, which we did not expect at budget time last year at April 21. Employee retention tax credit significant. I don't want to forget the favorable impact of those Department of Education grant for school-age services. It's been very helpful. And then we continue to manage our expenses. Obviously, we had still seeing the benefit of hard decisions we made over the past 2 years regarding Haven and staffing and process improvements, but so our expense controls are just continuing to provide good benefit, and then better than expected revenue, primarily annual charge, but also to some degree program revenue. So in light of those factors, just remind you that the point of this is to protect us against disruption of our programs and services, to provide organizational stability, to continue to keep us strong as an employer in the organization, in the community, in the county. So at this point, staff was proposing that we add $3 million to the reserves as of the end of April. So that would bring the reserve balance to $5 million, which is still only 29% of the total target, but we would feel that this is a good step forward, and is back to where what we had originally recommended from last year. So any questions or comments? Yeah. Dick?
This is terrific. I think this is very realistic. A couple of questions. I see how we're going to fund it this year. Is there any recommendation on how we would get up to that full 16 to $17 million? Is there an annual thing that you think we ought to stuff under the mattress? Or?
So I think we look at it every year, and frequently the research that we did showed that organizations often use circumstances that we experienced this year, where there's unexpected sources of income to
windfalls.
To take advantage of that. But I think we look at it every year, and I don't know that we could say each year this is the amount.
Okay, I have a couple of other quick questions here. The legal, you said, from what you were just saying, it sounded like what we were talking about is, tornado hits type of thing, and we have expenses, but then it says this is legal.
No, we would have, generally speaking, we have property coverage that would cover a severe weather event like that. Where we don't have property coverage in particular is where we have property in the floodplain. And so we have had that experience. We had a bridge wash out. We had to replace it.
Oh, yes,
it was
I know.
not covered.
But this isn't. These are not legal expenses.
So there would be some legal expenses. There are situations where, well, for one, there are two things happening. One is our insurance deductibles continue to grow. The responsibility of the organization continues to grow, in some part because of actions that are taken or behaviors, or we have uninsured legal risks. If we do not report a claim timely, it could be denied. If it was based on someone's intentional activity, it would be denied. There are multiple scenarios.
Well, what I'm getting at is that it seems to me that what this should be labeled as uninsured property losses.
It's not just property, that's the thing.
Well,
It could be employment practices related, D&O issues, personal injury related issues. It's the property piece is probably the smallest part.
and you think that that would be $7 million of legal expenses?
Yes.
Okay, it seems a little steep.
A quick question. Do you have a sense of how long it would realistically take us to reach the $17 million goal?
We say 2028, 6 years from right now. And that's what that's in the chart. Maybe I'll go back to that.
Yeah, thanks.
Andy?
No, Shari was ahead of me. So
Oh, that's
she's-
okay, go ahead.
No, you go, because you had your hand up before. She couldn't see
Couldn't
you.
see around you.
Yeah.
That's
that's-
okay.
Sorry.
All right, thank you, you're a gentleman. I had a question under the cash reserves policy. I just wanted to ask about, I'm just really, I'm so happy that we are moving in this direction because with what we know about climate change and everything else going on, and the insurance costs that are going up because all insurers are going up all over the country. So everything is going up. I think this is moving in the right direction. Under point number 3, I know we had talked about this once before, but I think as the amount in the cash reserves grows, it would be a good idea to segregate it in a separate account just for the purposes of designating it as not being part of the regular, because we never had this before, being part of the regular operating or capital budget, that it should appear somehow in its own line. Because this is looking at the sustainability issue, looking out over years. This is a long-term type of thing, and I think it's going to be a lot easier to be able to see this and track it and see how we're doing with it if it's designated in that kind of way.
So it is, and if you saw in the financial statements all year and actually last fiscal year, it's its own separate line on the statement of financial position.
Okay, so it is a separate bank account.
No, but it's a separate line item in the financial statements.
Okay. Is there an advantage to having it as a separate bank account for tracking purposes?
No.
So just going to throw it into the same big pot that we've always been putting things in?
There are parameters around the use of those funds.
Right.
So they're already designated regardless of where they're located.
Okay.
Andy?
Yeah, I had just asked if, what would be the impact if, we did 3.5 million. I mean, part of my thought is we're having a really good year so far. And you never know what the future years might be. And so, if we could, squeeze a little bit more out. But I don't know what the impact is.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. So you did submit that. So we looked at that. We looked at the cash flow projections. The additional $500,000 would not impact the FY23 projected borrowing needs. We still project ending that fiscal year without needing to draw on the line of credit, which is what we had projected and proposed and built the budget on. So it would not have that kind of impact. I don't think that we would want to go higher because I think we should look at that next year to go higher, just because of the capital spend and the increase in costs that we are just starting to experience.
Yeah, the one thing I had noticed, from your analysis, which I thought was pretty good, was, the bottom line was basically 5.2 5.2 million. And so I was thinking, we get the 5 million, but it's like, why can't we just hit the target?
Yeah.
And that was my thought is.
And you're right. I think we
And the
could do
other
that.
thing I thought is, if we hit the target, or, a little bit more, when we go to renegotiate for the line of credit, it just makes it a little stronger that, yes, the board of directors of this organization, is committed and they've hit the target. It's just like we're so close to the target. I'd pick 500,000, but, like 200,000 or something. But just something that got us up to that target or just a little bit over was what I was looking at.
I appreciate that.
Dick?
Yeah, and I agree. I think Andy's got a good point there. On the authority to use emergency cash reserves, obviously they are for emergencies, and emergencies can happen any time. I would like to have just a sentence on that first paragraph that says that the board will be informed. I mean, we don't necessarily have to meet and agree, but would be informed immediately if we start dipping into our, into our reserves. That's a critical issue. And if we get into that kind of a desperate situation, I think we're all going to want to know about it right away.
So are you proposing a change to the policy?
Just one sentence. This is in V, or 5. Authority to use emergency cash reserves. It gives the president and CEO authority to jump into and use the cash reserves. And the board only needs to know about it if it's going to not be repaid by the end of the year. But I would think that if we got into a situation where it was necessary to access the reserves, that's a red flag, and we better know about it right away. I don't want to be surprised at a meeting 2 weeks later, oh, by the way, we...
So, Dick, can I just point out section 6 of this policy?
Talking about going through the audit committee, okay. Blah, blah, blah.
I just wanted to point
Well,
out, we were talking about the funding. We'd have
just for deliberation, I'd like to have something in here where there's a flash announcement that we're scraping the bottom.
So this policy, I don't think the policy itself is not on the agenda, but if,
Yes.
And that was just,
for reference.
I believe, vetted last year at the same time with those kinds of discussions. So I just would defer to the
Yeah, I agree with
board
that.
that,
For tonight, we're talking about the amount total. If anyone wants to revisit the policy, we'll have to add that to it.
Well, did we mention the policy? Have we done this before? I'm
This
surprised.
board established this policy.
Oh, okay, but now we're changing policy.
We're not changing the
Well, we
policy.
changed the
We're
number.
adding money to the
We're changing
emergency
the-
reserve fund that we created with this policy.
Okay, that clarifies it, thank you.
And, number 6 discusses regular reporting, so, I'm not sure there's a ticker tape parade for, a drawdown, but I think, if anyone wants to discuss that at future meetings, then we can add that to a future agenda.
Let's just say I'd love to have an understanding that we'd know right away.
90 seconds.
90 seconds. Who wants to use up the last 90 seconds? All right. Thank you, Tina. Moving on to the board subcommittee report out on advisory committees. I will turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, Janet. I wanted to thank Janet, Tina, and Ashley for serving and coming up with a lot of great ideas and conversation. We looked at our current advisory committees, gave you a little bit of, background, make sure you realize we have 12 of them. And then we looked at it, and it just seems we have a number of different types of advisory committees. And so we thought it would be good at this time to categorize them. We came up with 3 categories. And then look at which ones really need board involvement, because part of the reason this subcommittee got formed is that we have these advisory committees, and we generally don't deal with them, and one of the problems is there's too many of them for us to really kind of get involved. So we had a lot of discussion, and these are the recommendations we came up with. Basically, look at, user-focused advisory committees, which are composed of users of services. And they provide feedback really to the different divisions and departments. They don't really necessarily have to provide, yearly reports back to the board. Topic-focused, art, climate, international watershed. Those are kind of focused around a particular area, a particular topic. And then finally, there's what we call the community engagement, which is more at the board level. It's targeting certain segments of the community, not for a particular program, but more engaged in terms of hearing back from that segment of the community on all of CA. And so if, Janet or Tina or Ashley want to jump in and say anything, we're certainly open for questions. It's just, we decided to do a really brief report with just the recommendations.
Questions or comments on any of the recommendations? Dick?
Yeah, as the board liaison with the Health and Fitness Advisory Committee, I've been to, the meetings, and what tends to be is most of the people there are CA staff members who report on their particular facilities or programs or whatever, which is terrific. I learn a lot about what's going on, but there are only 2 or 3 people who are actual members of the community. And I'm just wondering if there's how you would categorize a committee like that? And does it need to exist? Could it be something where the facility managers and everything for the gyms and the tennis center and whatever meet on their own, or do?
I can't speak for the entire committee, but my thought would be is that, it is really a specifically focused type of committee on the fitness regime, and we turn that over to the appropriate department and let them reconfigure it, to be more in line of what is needed in terms of user feedback.
The idea really was for the staff to get more use out of these boards because, or the committees, the board's kind of a roadblock whenever we're waiting for a committee to have the opportunity to talk to the board to say, hey, here's what we're presenting. As somebody that was on the Millennial Advisory Committee, we spent a lot of time talking about ideas and having suggestions, but they didn't get to go anywhere. There was literally only one event that we actually had impact on where we were able to make change, but that's because we were working directly with staff members on an event that they were planning. And I do think having the community engagement focused advisory committees, they benefit from having a board member on it because you're talking about a large segment of the population. But for user focus and topic focus, you're talking about changes that can be implemented immediately. And at a board level, we shouldn't really have any, we're not doing that at a granular level, right? Those are staff decisions that are going to be made, and we shouldn't be holding that up in general. But having the community engagement focused ones helping to steer our, the strategy and the culture of this organization so that we can understand what those groups, how they're evolving. That is definitely important for our involvement.
No, if I could just pick up on that. This committee that I'm on is a great committee. You've got some terrific staff there. And I just wondering, I like getting that feedback, and I also have an opportunity when I'm in these meetings to tell a little about what the board's doing in terms of budgets and things like that. So I'm just thinking it's kind of a mixed type of a committee. And
Dick, I just wanted to be clear, we're not recommending the board members not attend. We're just suggesting that staff be directing, so in the past, the board has provided feedback or input on things for some of the committees.
But you wouldn't have specific board members?
Right, so I think what you're describing is valuable, and so the board is represented there, and 2, take board stuff to them and you can bring stuff back to us. But to have those committees, primarily staff, driving the agenda and the utilization of the committee so that, so that we're not getting in their way. I mean,
No, well, whatever works best for the group.
so I mean, I think all of those, any committees, and part of this recommendation too was to make more transparent when committees were meeting so that anyone who had an interest could potentially participate or, go learn about something different, so.
Yeah, that's in recommendation 7, which I also really liked, was everybody would know when these meetings will occur, and also that minutes from each meeting must be available on CA's website. So it would be great to be able to know, what the Art Center Advisory Committee is doing if I don't have time to go to that meeting. And you may discover that you have a new interest, right? And you're going to go to that committee meeting in the future because we have all of our committees meetings listed. It's another way to do outreach to the public, right? If we're starting to have a more consistent method with all of our committees for maintaining that information when they meet.
Okay.
Ginny?
Andy, just if we could clarify a few things. On recommendation 3, really, it's not requiring the board really have a liaison there. It's staff-directed. But it is saying that the board should retain responsibility for approving the charter, and would that be changes to the charter as well?
Well, yeah, changes.
Like charges, they come in every year with charges, so for those committees, which is the user focus and the topic focused advisory, for example, would the board be approving charges? No?
No, we would turn that responsibility over to staff.
In both cases?
Yes, in both cases, user and topic. The thought is that what the board needs to focus on is the community engagement. And if you look at recommendation 6, it's, how do we want to use them as a board? Since they represent segments of the community. So, and the subcommittee just didn't have a lot of time to get into that and thought that required a lot more discussion.
So the only, I'm sorry, let me see if I understand. The only committee that the board would be hearing from then is C, Community Engagement Focus Advisory Committees?
Yes. But remember, anybody can come to the board at any time. But it's
they
not.
Don't usually feel,
Right.
I'm not sure they'd feel comfortable doing that as compared to the current process where they do seem to enjoy doing that. Okay. Okay.
Lakey?
I just wanted to weigh in that I've mentioned this before to the board, but I started convening the staff liaisons across all these advisory committees when I started my tenure. That had not been done previously. And in doing that process, and as hopefully everyone recalls that was here, we changed the format of what was included in the meeting presentation. And what I took away from that meeting, and I was one who was hearing it for the first time, was that every single committee that presented, which was I guess the 11 because the IT didn't exist, included a note saying that they wanted to understand how to have more impact on CA, whether that be program, whether that be activity, whether that be policy. And, I think everyone did it constructively, but there was, at least my takeaway, that there was a lot of questions of how was the board utilizing, the volunteer time, the expertise, kind of the effort that was going into the committees. So I feel like I heard that, directly from those committee reports. And then my experience in convening the group of staff liaisons, frankly, was pretty close to where these recommendations ended up, which was staff has had some concern about, since these are board committees, even though we might have ideas about how to make them more impactful or where they might be able to engage, they aren't staff driven, they aren't staff responsible. Staff is attending to facilitate scheduling the meeting and providing informational updates. So I just wanted to provide that context that kind of where the subcommittee ended up with the recommendations pretty closely aligns with both what I've heard from advisory committee members and also the staff liaisons, that I think we, and different staff feel differently based on the group, have some ideas about how those groups of people could be utilized differently to better benefit both for CA, but also to their volunteer time.
Sharon?
Yeah, so does this represent sort of a change in philosophy? Because in the past, the volunteer groups have kind of been kept a little bit apart from activities because they were not felt to be employees, that the staff was hesitant to use volunteers in certain capacities to do stuff for CA, although the volunteers were very eager to do stuff for CA. So this might open up some new possibilities for getting that deeper level of engagement. Because when people come up with great ideas, but then they're told they can't be part of it, that makes it a little hard, and it makes it hard to see the follow-through piece. This is something we're excited about, but we can't quite make it happen. So I think that's a very good point, if we can get those two things closer, so that the volunteers who are on these committees can actually be utilized and engaged as participants.
Lynn?
Yeah, again, having done a user-focused advisory committee, basically the committee, again, very compatible, full of information, but it's centered around their needs. This is the golf committee, course management, how are the leagues going, how's the food, this kind of thing. Too many people are playing, who's getting to make reservations first. Very focused on the immediate needs. My feeling was that I think this group is very good as a group for the golf course. But in terms of giving feedback to CA or getting feedback from CA, it might be better done in a smaller group that dealt more with policy. That met maybe quarterly or, intermittently, if set up that way, we could get people to think about, okay, fine, we're having issues, say at Fairway Hills is very popular this year, but we know it's going to flood again. How are we going to deal with this? What's going to be is there a better use for this course? How are we going to change things to make things more inclusive? I think these things have to be talked about, but the meetings as they occur today are really just player focused. And we might want to look at just changing that with, as I said, a smaller group with some more focused questions. What are they concerned about in terms of their membership, things like that? What's CA concerned about? And then talk about that and get it back to the bigger group. Like we have 30 people in the group, so.
That's great.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you guys for doing this work.
Andy, yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, so Janet, we're going to put this on the board meeting for perhaps a vote.
Correct, yes.
I mean, the recommendations we're putting forth, so. And I do want to thank Janet, Tina, and Ashley for all the help they gave.
Where'd that get you?
Moving on to revisions to the ethics policies. I'm going to have Wes kick us off.
So I'm going to make a quick comment because I'm going to pass out, well, super quick, just because I have the handout, so I want to explain what I'm handing out. So I have printed out for everyone the email that I sent March 31st, kind of with the big recap of what process we're in, what kind of how we put the draft document together, what kind of the highlighted key changes would be, and the intent for kind of moving through the discussion. So just because we had a long list of kind of the key highlight changes, I wanted to make sure everybody had it in front of them. So now, Wes, please kick us off.
Thank you, Lakey. So when I came on board, it was made very clear to me that the board and senior staff recognized the need for the ethics policies to be revised and updated. As you all know, there are currently 4 sets of ethics policies. Some of them have quite long titles, but just a reminder for everybody, and this is again in the correspondence that Lakey just handed out. The Code of Ethics and Business Conduct, the Special Ethics Policy Requirements for Board of Directors, Conflicts of Interest Policy for Senior Management and Board Directors, and the Policy for Reporting Violations of Ethics Policies. Of those 4, one was last updated in 2017, another was updated in 2018, and then 2 were updated in, I believe, 2020. So when Lake and I first discussed revising and updating, and I determined that it's best, given that all these are policies associated with ethics, for them to be updated simultaneously to ensure consistency and to ensure that there is no redundancy. So again, Lakey in her March 31st, 2022 email did provide you with the process that we established, so I'm not going to belabor that. If you can review that while I speak. But there are a number of reasons, as I'm sure you are all aware of, why ethics policies need to be updated and revised and reviewed on a regular basis. Internally, ethics policies provide us with the values that CA seeks to strive to achieve, and it also establishes the standards of professional conduct, and that's internally. Externally, ethics policies foster an environment for compliance with the law, and they also mitigate risk should there be external agencies that are called upon to look into CA's practices. So it's for those reasons, and those are just a couple of reasons, but those are the ones I've chosen to name, but it's for those reasons that we require that the ethics policies be signed by senior staff and by board members without exception. So moving along, myself as well as other individuals on the senior leadership team, including Lakey, Monica, and Jackie, spent time reviewing the policies, and we were reviewing them for best practices, both from an ethical standpoint, both from a compliance program standpoint, and from a legal standpoint. And we wanted to make sure that that these ethics policies engaged all of those aspects accurately and completely. So at the end of the day, what I did in spearheading this was I decided to combine all 4 of the current ethics policies into one. Again, they all speak to ethics, so they should be combined in one. By combining them, we ensure that when we review them and update them, that we do so consistently. And it just makes sense it helps understand the policies all together without having to refer to several different documents. Again, as you will see from the March 31st email, there is a list of the significant changes, and I know that list may seem long, but we did want to make sure that you got an overall understanding of the types of changes that were made. I did receive an email, or I saw an email from Andy with some of his concerns, questions, comments, which was very helpful because they were very specific and pointed. We can address those here. But with that, I invite a discussion or specific questions and comments on specific aspects of this revised and updated policy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agreed with Andy's increase for the amounts that were listed for gifts, entertainment, and gratuities that he updated. that seems more in line with how the cost of items have been, especially in Howard County.
No, sure. I don't want to interject if anybody else has comments. Yeah, no. So that $25 amount, when you look at other policies, seems to be a pretty standard number. But to your point, right? It's pretty standard around the block. But I think it's clear that that number has not been in line with inflation over the past however many years, because it's been $25 ever since I started practicing as an attorney, several years ago. So I wouldn't, I don't think that's a bad idea, but I just think we should also keep in mind that it's meant to be a small amount, and it's specifically to meant to dissuade people from engaging in some sort of like bribery, et cetera. So that's why it's supposed to be a small amount, but yeah, increasing it by a bit shouldn't be problematic from a best practices standpoint.
Dick and Eric?
Wes, I want to thank you. This is an incredible improvement over what we had before. I have been trying for 4 years to get all of it put into one document, and I think you've done a terrific job here. There are two ways of looking at this. First of all is the substance, and I think 95% of this is stuff everybody's going to agree on. And the others will probably have some discussion about, and of course, keeping in mind that it has to meet legal standards. There's also a style issue. When you take a lot of material from different sources and by different authors, it's not always consistent. And in some places we use Oxford commas, and in some places we don't. I don't want to bore the board tonight with where all the commas ought to go, but there are a lot of them that could be changed. I also noticed in here, sometimes we talk about the policy, sometimes we talk about policies, sometimes we talk about code, and we'll probably want to make sure that we get all those in alignment. Being a hopeless English major, I've gone through and checked a lot of this out. Like I said, if there's a better way, this is a way to communicate where we go with some of this stuff. If you'd like me to take a red line to it or something like that, I think I'd be glad to do that.
No, sure. I appreciate your comments. Yeah, this is, we try to clean up as much of the typos, comments, et cetera.
I didn't see a typo.
This out.
In fact, there's only one typo in the mix. There are little things like when you have a list of, 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes the end punctuation, there's no end punctuation. Sometimes there's a period, sometimes there's a comma, sometimes there's a semicolon. Janet, I'm finished. I got my 3 minutes here.
Yeah,
so I would like to work with you
let's focus on substance.
to do a look over on that.
Okay. Eric?
So we started with 4 documents, and we basically are combining them into one. Is there a sort of a one-to-one correspondence between the document and the section number? Because I also noticed there are 4 sections. So does section 1 refer to one document, section 2 refer to really just have the text from the second document, or is it a little more complex than I'm making that out to be?
No, I organized. I don't know that the original or the 4 separate documents were numbered per se. I just, as I and my team worked on it, we organized it in a way that we thought would make the most sense. So there's, I guess I can stop there. Unless there's more.
I guess my question is all the information in section 1 coming from one of the old documents, and all the information in section 2 coming from another one of the old documents?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Or is the information from the 4 documents sort of mixed, intermingled across all the 4 sections?
I understand your question now. No, the sections are, it was a movement from one of the current policies to that section, right? There was not, I didn't break up the language in the policies and spread them out differently.
And my second question is, given that
Can I make one clarification on that, just from a tracking change standpoint? Because there were in the 4 policies that were separate documents, redundancies. It's not, we took one and it's now chapter 1.
Right.
There were significant changes, and even in rearranging the order of things. So even though the content is largely similar, you couldn't look at one document and line it up to the other one. I just want to clarify that for review.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was going with the second question is it possible to sort of get a red line and see was in this, what was modified from the old documents?
I will say this. I do have a red line, but because I merged everything, it does no good because the whole entire document is a red line, right? So, there was, and when I've done these types of revisions before in the government before I came here, yes, typically there'd be a red line addition, but that's when you're making pointed changes. This was an overhaul. So when I moved the language from these policies into the one document, they came up as red because that's how they come up when you track change it. But what you can do is, because I took the sections or each policy and put them in one section, you could look at section 1, take the current policy as it is and compare the two. But I will say largely the language is the same. And you can see the summary of the major changes from the outline.
Yeah, so what Lakey just handed out has the list of all of the changes, so I think that's the easiest place to see what was updated in those policies.
Just a couple of comments. Again, when you go to page 3, I'm just looking at B, compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. Obviously, this is critical. I think it would be very helpful for the board. We all come in from different areas. We've had different experiences with legal matters, with legislative matters, that kind of thing. I think it would be a good introduction for everybody, especially when new members are onboarded, to go over what are we required to do, say, under the HOA Act. What are required, what are some of the legislative, matters that have been passed recently? Well, how does that impact us? Just have a review of that, an explanation of that when you come in. Where to find this information? I think that would be really helpful. I think a lot of, some of the dysfunction on the board is we all come in with different attitudes about things. I find that, again, fiduciary duty, it has always been an issue. People understand it differently. So that again, board education discussion on those kinds of things might be really helpful as you go into a year, so that even if you can't get everybody on the same page, at least the pages have been introduced. And then one other little bit of comments based on my recent experience. Let's see, page 37. Now do it here. It's tough. 25. Anyway, the complaint process. I found, again, receiving a complaint, especially with the subject of one, is an important part of the process. I found that not being able to get a copy of the complaint in writing was difficult. It's difficult to answer a question when you really don't have the specific nature of the issue in front of you. So I would hope that we could get the complaints. Hopefully we won't have any more or many more, but get them in writing. I think that would be important in the front. And it says there'll be summaries of the complaint will be summarized. Rather than a summary, rather than giving the actual complaint. I don't know why you would not just give the the complaint as it was received rather than summarize. I'm just curious, what's the difference there? Why would we do that change?
No, sure. In subparagraph C,
Okay.
I know it's but we're talking about section 4, reporting ethics violations, subparagraph C. No, that was addressed there. So the idea is that, or now the term is that when a complaint is filed, that the subject of the complaint does receive a written copy within 24 hours. And I know, and we can come back to that, Andy, I believe that was one of your questions. But that you receive it within 24 hours, because that is absolutely a best practice. If you're the subject of a complaint, in order to respond, have a meaningful opportunity to respond, you need to have it as quickly as possible. So that is addressed in there.
Yeah, I didn't see that it was specified in writing.
Oh, yeah.
But, good.
Well, I think
Yeah,
a distinction.
So I've got within 24 hours of receipt of a complaint, the PEO or other designee shall confirm with the complainant that the complaint has been received, and within 24 hours of the receipt of the complaint, that the PEO or other designee shall inform the subject of the complaint that a complaint has been filed.
Right. I would just add in writing.
Okay.
I was just going to clarify that in my experience, the reason that you write in summary and you do not guarantee that you're going to forward, say, an email or a memo statement is that everything from terminology can be recognized, right? It's supposed to be anonymous in most cases, certain language patterns, those kind of things. So that's generally why you wouldn't take a complaint as it was written directly from someone and give it to someone else, because there could be identifying factors. So that's, in my experience, why you would provide, to your point, something in writing that summarizes it, but you might not see verbatim what it says.
Because it could be redacted for the anonymity. But yes, but certainly, I will make sure to relook at that and maybe tighten that up. But yeah, that's a good point.
Dick? A couple points. First of all, you've done a great job getting rid of all the redundancy, and that was a serious problem in the old plan. There are two areas where maybe we could do that even further. One is the conflict of interest section. We mentioned it up front, and then we have a whole section on conflict of interest. You could probably take that first one and just say see section 4 or whatever it is. The other one is reporting illegal and unethical behavior. Again, that gets repeated. We have a whole section on how the situation reports. So that might be a couple of places where we could lose a page or two.
Wait, so I got the first one, the two separate areas of conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest and reporting illegal and unethical behavior. So there's a reporting system, and we mentioned that up in the front section, and it could say a C. See the section that specializes. I don't have it in front of me which one that is, but those two could be condensed. The other thing is we do mention at times employee handbook, the purchasing policy, other things. It scares me a little bit to have an ethics policy where some of the stuff is not available. Do we need to include things from the employee handbook in this? I mean, not the whole employee handbook, of course, but anything in the employee handbook on ethical behavior. Or on purchasing policy, is there anything in there that's different from, we do have a big conflict of interest section in there about how you purchase things. Is there redundancy there, or is there a need to spell that out?
No, I think the idea is that there are points in those policies that are not being spelled out here, but we're referring to them because they're not necessarily ethical policies, but there's
well,
things that you mentioned.
On conflict of interest, you kind of repeat yourself. I mean, it's all good stuff. It just seems it needs, only needs to be stated once. And the same thing with reporting. You start off with the reporting procedure, and then we have a whole section on the reporting procedure, so it might be possible just to direct people to that
Thank you.
section.
I'll take a note of that. Thank you.
Sherry?
Yeah, I have a couple of pages of notes here. So I'm just going to try and keep this brief. On section C, maybe it's C2, page 27, I'm going by what was listed on it. There is a section on I, and it says for 1 year, it talks about employment for at CA 1 year after you leave the board. Right, that used to be 2 years. Why was it switched to 1 year?
I'm not,
So
first of all, I'm not seeing.
there are 4 section Cs here.
So, yeah, so
Okay,
there's-
so,
There's subparagraphs B, but section what?
all right, so it looks like it's at, I was on page 27, going through what was posted on the website.
Okay, sure.
What was that?
12.
Thank
Page
you.
12, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I still don't see where it says that.
It was about,
Oh, it's page 14.
Oh, F.
oh, we have it right here, I'm sorry.
Yeah, H, okay.
It used to be that, that once you got off the board, you had to wait 2 years because people are elected to 2-year terms in most of the villages. So you had to wait 2 years before you could be employed by CA really in any capacity. So I'm just wondering why the group changed that.
That's good. For that particular one, I'll have to look at the notes on that, but I can get back to you.
All right, if you could just find out about that.
Sherry, do you feel strongly about that? I'm just curious.
I think there's a good reason why it should be 2 years.
No, I'll look at the notes. You're talking about H or?
I'll have to go back and find the,
It's I on
I'm
page
sorry,
14.
I numbered it differently and but I also did have a question about, there are several places about the procedure about reporting to. And it says that the PEO will report to the CA president, and I think it should include to the CE president and CA board chair. I think there's an important reason, that occurs several times.
Which page is that, Schmaltz?
My page or your
Which page do you have noted?
It looks like it's,
Laptop, it was page 36. I
it
don't
looks
know
like
what
page 21.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of that
21,
distinction,
That's 36.
a lot of that distinction is based on who the complaint against. Obviously, there are ones that go to the board chair, and then there are
Then it
ones that
appears
do not.
again, there are several sections where the reporting function seems to go directly from the PEO to the CA president, but there's no inclusion of the CA board chair. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think the issue of communication is really, really important. And that if the CA president and the board chair should be notified at the same time. So everybody's on the same page at the same time.
Right. So on page 21, there are several reporting tracks. So complaints should ordinarily be made to the principal ethics officer. If a complaint concerns the principal ethical officer, then it will be made to the president. If a complaint concerns CA's president or a board member, the complaint should be made directly to the chair of the board of directors. So there's a flow depending on who the subject of the complaint is, which is why it's different in different circumstances.
Right, but there are other sections here, and I'm sorry I can't match them up right now, where the information flow seems to be restricted between the PEO and the president.
Okay, look at that.
And so if you can take a look at those sections and just include, and the CA board chair.
Excuse me, but would that be true if it were for an employee? I don't know.
No.
So
That wouldn't be.
that might
You
need
don't
to be.
want us to.
I'll look at, I'll certainly take.
All right, so maybe it's the section on the board.
Right, I've taken note and I will say.
All right, and maybe the section on the board, because these other circumstances could, the president certainly could inform the CA chair
Sure.
if circumstances warrant. But where the board is concerned, the CA president must inform, really.
So if it
The CA.
concerns the board, just to be clear, it goes to the board chair. It does not go to the president.
Right, it goes to the.
Period.
Which is what I just read.
Yeah, it does not.
Well, I'll look through again. I have it written down several times, so I'll look through
Okay.
for where I saw that and where it jogged for me as being something. And then there was something where it said that the PEO would be selecting outside counsel. How would that be done?
For,
The case is against the entire board of directors.
Right. So outside counsel, how would outside counsel be selected, or by whom?
well, it depends on who the subject of the complaint is. If it's by the board, then the board chair would be
I think she's
integral in that.
referring
process.
to the one that says, in the case of a complaint against the full board of directors, the PEO should refer to outside counsel. Section E on page 21 of the actual document, 36 in the electronic document.
And I guess my other question was.
Well, can you
Oh,
just give me
okay.
a second to look
Sorry.
it up?
All right.
And if anyone else has any questions, Sherry's way over her time. So
All right, I will hold off on the rest of these, and
No,
I'll put this through to the whole board.
Thank you.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Lynn and then Eric.
Yeah, just a quickie on page 23, talking about the investigation itself. It talks about shall be completed within 60 calendar days. That seems, again, awfully long. I would think it would have to be a fairly complicated issue. I was just,
No, that's another best practice, is because you have to give, because it's very difficult to determine, like you said, the complexity of the case.
Right.
So you at least want to give the investigator enough time to conduct a full investigation for a complex matter. But again, that's a stopgap. So it has to be done within 60 days. It can be done sooner than that. And then for those that are truly complex, they could ask for an extension of the 60 days. Only if they have good cause, but that's the idea. Is you got to give enough space for the investigator to do their job if it's a more complex investigation. But also, I need to put a stop. Right, but you need to put a stop there because you also don't want, to your point, you don't want an investigation of a relatively minor complaint, if there is one, but you know what I'm saying, a minor complaint, to take 6 months. So we had to put a stop on it.
And you can't extend it.
So you can,
Yes.
you can extend, but it has to be for good cause. So
Yeah.
for example, and I mean, let's be honest, there's some investigations or some allegations that are so complex.
No, I just want to point out.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Eric.
So Sherry brought up what I consider a material change to the code, the 1 year versus a 2 year change. What I would like to see is just a highlighting of what are the material changes, not so much where the text got moved around, but what are the key material changes that we're making to this code? So would possibly get such a highlighting that shows.
So there's a summary. There's a summary there.
No, I don't see the 1 or 2 year changes in this email. Like getting to that specificity, where we changed from 2 years to 1 year for that particular point that Sherry found. Would it be possible to get to that level of
I'll pull up the current board ethics policy, and it's only 1 year.
Oh, it is only 1 year.
Thank you.
So it wasn't changed.
Okay. I thought that was a material change.
Andy?
Yeah, just a couple of things. You got my email, Wes.
Yes.
So let's just talk about the, so we're under complaint, reporting violations. Since I had to handle a bunch of them over a number of years, and I'll let Janet talk for her. 24 hours seem to be really, really difficult for the chair. I mean, I can understand it for internal to the organization, but I mean, the problem is the chair kind of sits out, and the chair doesn't really get the complaint yet that comes through somebody. And so you have to get that complaint. And I will tell you, sometimes the complaints are not totally understandable. And so there's a back and forth, okay, what is it actually? And then, of course, I hate to say it, I don't do enough of these, and I kind of like, oh, what do I need to do now? So I run back to the general counsel or things. But it just seems to me from my experience that for the chair, it's going to be literally impossible to do it in 24 hours.
So here's my only, I understand what you're saying, but here's my pushback there, is that this requirement isn't to get into the weeds of the complaint. It's literally just notification. Like, hey, within 24 hours, individual who's submitted the complaint, it's been received. Within 24 hours, hey, you are the subject of a complaint. And that goes to the whole, if I can use the phrase due process, even though that's not, criminal case, is the idea that when somebody is the subject of a complaint, they should be made aware immediately so that they can start preparing their ability to respond. So it is truly just a notice, like one sentence. Now, obviously, then there's going to have to be some additional reporting to the individual, like providing them the substance of the complaint. But to your point, I can clarify that it's just truly a notice. A notice. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, it does, because that 24 hours just seemed to be very tight.
Well, yeah, especially if there's any summary expected, because that's not.
Yeah, because with the summary,
I can parse that out and make sure that it's truly just notice, and that's honestly for the when you submit a complaint, you want to know that it's been received, and when you're the subject of a complaint, you definitely want to know within immediately but I can tighten that up.
And of course, it should be also once the chair's been notified, because as I said, the complaints really never come in to the chair. They come in on the ethics hotline, or they come into the PEO, and then that person has to notify the chair. And so we need to make sure that that's doable within.
No, thank you for that.
And then if you want to, the conflict of interest in terms of, the apparent conflict of interest with the villages. This was a huge topic of discussion years ago when the ethics policies were first, not so much an actual conflict of interest, but it's the appearance, because we kept getting twisted up, and then we seem to be so tied together that, yeah, we do have an appearance of conflict, and we can't get around it. And so that's why I just wrote my question.
No, sure. And the issue here is that similar, there was a term that was removed, like you can't waive ethics, right? You can provide mitigating circumstances to maybe lessen the quote unquote punishment, but it's the same thing with conflict. As I was speaking to however many board meetings ago, there's conflicts of interest, there's appearances of conflicts of interest, but that a conflict of interest may exist or appear to exist, it doesn't stop there. So we all know that this exists between the villages, to your point. The point is that when there is a conflict of interest or an appearance of, i.e. the villages, when you're in a village meeting and there's a point of interest that comes up and you're going to be actually taking, deliberating on or voting on or something like that, you need to raise the fact that hey, you may have a potential conflict of interest. the two entities are then supposed to address it. Now, I know, to your point, the villages and TA seem to be so intertwined. It's almost as if in a meeting, you'd be raising your hand every time. Well, I've got a conflict of interest. I've got a conflict of interest. But it's still, but just because that's the case doesn't mean it can't be addressed, especially when we're talking about voting and deliberating on major issues. And that's particularly important where a village or another entity may be at odds with CA, because in my short experience here, I've seen where the village, village and CA may be on opposing spectrums when it comes to an issue. In those cases, you would certainly raise the fact that, hey, I've got a potential conflict here, and that's why. So, again, I'm not trying to pretend that it's an easy nut to crack, but your proposal, though, is what for this?
The board had investigated and determined that there is no inherent appearance of, an inherent conflict of interest. Part of what the board was concerned about is the resident could come up and say, oh, you have a conflict of interest. And then we have to go through this whole chain of, well, no, it's really not. And then you say, well, how do you determine it? Because it just seems to be very, very hard. I sit on both boards. I don't have a vote on one, but I do talk. Yeah. And so it was just like, we could be sitting here constantly, having to address somebody else claiming, oh, you have a conflict of interest, you have a conflict of interest. And it's like, how do we handle that? I don't want to have to do this time after time after time. Just some resident walking in and saying, well,
Yeah, and I see in your email that you've proposed some language there.
Yeah. And I think that language was to just say, look, we can address it at one time, and if somebody else comes in with the same complaint, we say no. But it was a huge.
Well, if I can just clarify for a second, we're elected by our villages to represent our communities, and we're elected as the Columbia Council.
We elect
But then you elect yourselves, to be the board members of the Columbia Association.
Right, but that's the secondary step. So what Andy's saying is that, this is completely intertwined. Unlike, that's why we are a unicorn. And, when you go out and you look at corporate law really does not, it's not going to have a whole lot to say to describe this particular format, because there aren't a whole lot of places that are like this.
No, this is a very unusual structure, sure, but just because it's unusual doesn't mean we cannot address conflict of interest. We have to. We have to do it meaningfully, and we have to do it seriously. So yeah, Andy, you raise a great point here, and I certainly appreciate your comment here, because I will certainly look at it, because it's a fine comment. That's why this is a draft. That's why we're discussing this. This isn't the final. Hence the point of this discussion. So I certainly won't dismiss this. That's why I've got a team. You make a great point, and that's why I just said I completely understand that the commingling here, the nature of this structure, very unusual. But we have to still address conflict.
Keep in mind, too, we will be discussing this at next meeting as well, so there's some time we won't be voting on this at next meeting.
But one last question, the one that I raised was also on the outside communication, because that one perplexes me for this kind of the same reason. I can't really identify when I'm talking to my village, I can't really identify myself as an individual, because I'm talking to my village as my position as being the rep. And so therefore, when I talk, they expect that. That's, there's no, I can't say, oh, it's me. And so in essence, I am speaking. Right.
as a representative.
As a
voice.
representative. And I don't know how to get around it. Okay, I mean, it triggered in my mind, this is a potential problem. And if you have any solutions, and once again, it's inherent in the position, not necessarily me, it's what that position is supposed to be doing.
Right.
Okay, we have Ginny, Dick, Eric, and then Tina. Ginny, you're up.
Yeah. Okay, one question and just one comment. When a complaint is filed and say it's the chair that has to handle that complaint, the chair only has 30 days to resolve it, right? Make a decision.
Not resolve, make a decision as to.
Make a decision, dismiss, yeah. So that, I think, is why it's so important that the individual who is being complained about must know within the 24 hours. The second thing is, if you're at a board meeting, I'll just follow up on Andy's point, and CA is looking at doing X, CA board, and you are being asked, what's your position? Don't you have a right to say, I, as an individual, think A, as opposed to, it looks like the board's going to go with Z? And explain your reasoning. Otherwise, you look like you don't think, you know? I mean, I don't know if I understand your question. What?
I think, because I thought Andy was talking.
I mean, I don't see that as a conflict is what I'm trying to say. Is it?
Yeah, I don't understand.
I think we all express our opinions.
Right, right. You're expressing you make it clear you're expressing your opinion as an individual. And I don't see that as a problem.
I don't think that is a problem.
Okay.
I think the problem is if you were to go,
We have a queue, we have a queue.
well, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and then the second example then would be if the board took, actually, that was considering a position, if the board actually took a position and voted, and it didn't go in your favor, say, can you go and object to that and encourage the public to come and protest that vote?
So I guess at this point, I don't want to engage in too many hypotheticals right now because we could do that. Is there if there's a point that you want me to that you think I should change? I'll take note of that. Is there a point? Is there a certain aspect of the?
I'm trying to find out if that would be a conflict or an ethics concern.
Yes, if the board takes a vote and you go out and try to rally a crowd to go against.
It would be an
what-
ethics complaint.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I think I'm next.
You're up, Dick.
Okay. Wes, I'm glad this came up because this is.
Excuse me, though, I would like to just call out, we are sticking to substantive changes to the ethics policy. We are not discussing hypotheticals or situations.
No, I'm not
or
talking about
examples. I just want to make sure, okay.
I'm going back to Andy's point, which I think is a good one. And one of the things you're going to be running into is that we are a very unusual, as Sherry said, a unicorn, in that we are elected. And so we do have our loyalty to CA, but we have also a loyalty to our constituents. Because if they think we're not doing our jobs, we're not going to get reelected. So there is a real tight thing that I think has to be addressed in this ethics code. We really have to make sure that as we write this, we're not dealing with other boards, which are mostly fundraisers for, or whatever. This is a very peculiar situation. So I hope that you'll give a lot of thought to what Andy's said and see if you can work something so that we make it clear that we do have a much more unusual role than a typical board.
Eric?
So I want to follow up on Ginny and Andy. So with regard to your comments, Ginny, so I read an article in our Village newsletter every month, and one of the things I have at the end of my article is that these opinions are my own and not the board of directors, even though I'm on the board of directors. So there's that disclaimer every article I write, and that's in there. So I think that's one of the key things, that when you're writing as your own opinion, that you make it very clear that this is your opinion and not the opinion of the board of directors, and it's very clear that it's very important to have that distinction. Following up on Andy's comments between the board of directors and the villages, one of the things that, like for example, a couple months ago, we had a vote on a particular facility in a particular village. We want to make it clear that's not a conflict of interest, even though there's going to be a member in that village voting for a facility in their own village. So that's where things can get sort of complicated, and we want to make sure that it is not appear to be a conflict of interest in this policy.
Tina?
In your research, have you seen any forward-looking trending towards including some kind of a commitment to DEI best practices or that kind of, I don't even know how to ask the question.
Not from an ethical standpoint. In the documents that I reviewed from various companies, I did not specifically see any ethical terms around DEI. That doesn't mean they're not out there. I just the ethical policies that I saw did not address that. But if you come across any that you think, then certainly make me aware.
Yes?
I was going to answer a question that Jenny posed, so never mind.
In response to Tina's question, yes, it's already addressed in here. We do have a number of paragraphs that talk about.
Well, I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion as far as.
Well, we do have material in here about discrimination.
Discrimination.
Yeah.
But then there's inclusion.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah. There's discrimination. There's inclusion. They're different. But yeah, if you find something, please, that you are thinking about, let me know.
Okay, any additional comments?
We have 13 minutes.
We don't have to use it. That's okay.
I said nothing.
Okay, moving on to questions only. Anyone have anything? Andy, and then Vic.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had a bunch of questions. On the development tracker, I noticed the Community Ecological Institute request, which talked about deferring the forest conservation requirement, which I thought was kind of unusual because I don't think I've ever seen a request to defer again. And so I was wondering if Jessica may be able to address it. In particular, what I worry about is if this sets a precedent that developers who have phases of projects can then go in and ask for a deferral of the forest conservation until the very end and then not do it. So that's why that's what caught my mind. It wasn't so much that I'm opposed to it. It's just it was a very unusual request, and I worry about the precedent it sets.
Hey, Andy, I'm online and can answer those questions. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. So I had a lot of fun looking this question up because forest conservation did not used to apply in Newtown zoning, so I haven't had a lot of reason to dig into that very much. So I appreciate you expanding my knowledge base. But what basically happens is the forest conservation regulations and the forest conservation manual, there is a clause within it that was created for properties that are not trying to develop, but they're ones that have already been developed, but they're triggering some kind of forest conservation regulatory requirement. So, for example, in this case, prior to the Community Ecology Institute buying this property, the owner had done a bunch of work on the property that was not compliant with the site development plan on file, which means that everything that the Community Ecology Institute is trying to do, they don't have a standing compliant SDP. So the way that the Forest Conservation Manual is written is that they are eligible to take an option that if they are doing a small disturbance they don't have to go through the process of getting a new SDP that's up to date. They can redline their existing one, and they don't have to go through the process of going through all of the requirements of the Forest Conservation Plan, from delineating the trees out there and creating the space necessary to set up the permanent easement for that, because they're not triggering the threshold. So for example, prior to this, they did a small stormwater management project, and for this one, they're doing some parking areas. Instead, what happens is the cumulative effect of the work they're actually doing every time they did that stormwater management, when they're doing this parking, the limits of disturbance and the area that they're working in gets calculated, and it becomes a cumulative process that's tallied and tied to that property. And if that cumulative disturbance reaches over 40,000 square feet, it triggers the forest conservation requirements. So it is tracked. It's just such a small project that it was really written to say it doesn't make sense to make a resident like go through this entire very expensive forest conservation plan project for a very small disturbance when that's not the intent of the regulatory system. And then the way that the rules are written, to, you'd asked in your question about like what stops a developer from choosing to do this, is that that cumulative process is tallied, but then everything that you do, it essentially makes you have to reach a higher threshold. Because then when you finally reach that threshold where you have to do the forest conservation plan, you now have to meet it as like an off-site requirement, which means you now have to, instead of provide 1 acre of forest conservation, you have to provide 2 acres of forest conservation. So there's actually a penalty to using this process. And then for developers, you cannot subdivide a property without doing a forest conservation plan. So any developer who's seeking to subdivide and do a traditional infill development can't use this process. Does that answer all the questions you'd raised?
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, you've addressed the concerns, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So my second, well, let's go to Blandair Park.
Yeah.
The Blandair Park one, I noticed that, they were just making requests to go within the 100-foot stream buffer. And I understand they have some valid reasons for it. But I just kind of worry a little bit about the fact that they want to use it for parking.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, well, we've been trying very hard to get permeable surfaces to not pave over these areas. So is it possible to ask the county when they consider this request for a modification to require like those parking spaces be pervious or something? It's just because they're in the stream buffer.
Yeah. So alternative compliance requests for the stream buffer, it has to go through a 3-department review. So that includes not only Department of Planning and Zoning, but the Office of Sustainability. And they have to essentially look at what's being proposed, and anyone from the public, including NFCA has concern, can address the reviewers and say, hey, we're worried and we would propose a mitigation or some kind of mitigation, or we'd like to know what you guys are proposing to mitigate this. So that's absolutely something that can be done. I would venture to say though that it's probably more appropriate to, rather than say, hey, we saw you doing asphalt, we would prefer you do permeable pavers. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to advocate for a certain kind of treatment because the site conditions might lend themselves towards, if what you're trying to do is protect the stream valley and treat for stormwater, if you're already in a floodplain, a permeable paver might not be the best solution there, and it might be just a very expensive, very pretty, fancy solution, but it does actually treat the stormwater you're concerned about. So you kind of want to leave it to experts to decide what's the best mitigation in this scenario. But I think we can take the appropriate steps of contacting those reviewers and just saying, we are concerned about this. We'd like some kind of mitigation to be included, and then they will take note of that and consider it. But I wanted to let you know, for this particular case, the Parks and Rec department got ahead of themselves a little bit, and they put in this alternative compliance request before they've actually submitted their site development plan. So DPC can't take any action on this particular request because they have to review the design plans. And so there might be a possibility that they might reconfigure the parking lot anyway to have less disturbance or to have less impact, which is obviously the ideal solution to try to meet the regulations as best you can. But there is an existing pathway here that's going to have to receive some grading as a result of any of this phased improvement. So regardless, there are going to be some impacts in the floodplain to maintain that existing connectivity. But we can, at staff level, we can obviously reach out to DPC staff and relay these concerns.
No, that's good. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. And then the last question I just had was Lakefront North, just, my continuing concerns, which you've heard when Greg Fitchett was here with Road B and the intersection with LLP, and then, just stormwater management, because I've been made very aware this last year about how much water is coming into CA property.
Right, so for stormwater management in Lakefront North, throughout the development process, before you can submit any other plans, you have to submit an environmental concept plan. And that is essentially showing, I have a concept for developing the site. I have to prove that I am capable of meeting the stormwater regulations. And Lakefront North has an approved environmental concept plan. They've shown that they meet the regulations for stormwater management for developing in that area. And those regulations are really a binary. You either meet them and you can proceed forward, or you do not meet them.
That's good. So they did, the county did look at it?
Yes, they have to look at it, and they look at not only what you're doing on site from a capture perspective, like you have to capture all the stormwater that falls on your site. And the county cannot approve a plan that increases flow off of that developed site onto an adjacent property. So they have to be able to capture the stormwater. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that the stormwater regulations for infill and development of sites that have already previously been developed, there's a difference for the amount of treatment of that water you have to do. So like the 1-inch rainfall, and that's really about water quality. And it's a lesser threshold than if you're developing a brand new greenfield site or one that has never been developed before. So capture stormwater volume, they have to meet 100%, but for treatment, it's 50%.
Did CA look at the area? I mean, kind of our, for stormwater in particular.
Can you clarify in terms of look at the area,
well,
like for
like,
how the water is flowing?
Yeah, because it's going to come into our property with the outflows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, I will say that both the county looks at it, and they have to look at the flow rates for that outfall and ensure that it's designed to meet the capture flow of not just at 1 inch, but at all types of thresholds. And then we also benefit from having some internal expertise. So John McCoy does review these and kind of raise any concerns he might have about any potential erosion. These are obviously fluid plans at this point, but there's no concern or flag that has been raised for that.
okay, that's good. That's good to know John looked at it. And I guess the last real question was, Road B. And, the concern with how close it is to the Wynkopen intersection, and also the Exxon gas station, in out. I mean, it's like between Wynkopen and Starrett, there's going to be like 2 more entrances, exits. And it just to me, it seems like a potential traffic problem, safety issue. And so I worry a little bit about that type of so close, so many entry points off of Little Patuxent Parkway in such a short distance.
Yeah, so I'll attack this several different ways. From a safety perspective, when a site development plan goes through, a traffic study has to also be submitted. That includes a justification of why are we making these connections? How does that relate to both safety, but also system functionality? Because you're also looking at how much traffic is already out there, how much traffic is being generated by the land use, how do we anticipate the traffic flowing based on the type of land use and the patterns that we see in real time, as well as best practices that you tie to that. And so that's really a technical review and decision that the Department of Engineering, the environmental, and the Department of Public Works at the county makes when they're reviewing those technical traffic studies. And so they get to determine access length, safety, and system functionality. And then I can talk more about, like, from a site plan design and from an urban design perspective, what we are trying to create in downtown Columbia is a pedestrian-focused, urban scale, vibrant downtown. And what makes those successful is frequent connections, short blocks, and slower traffic. Those frequent connections, what's being proposed in Road B, not only is it addressing kind of the system functionality of dispersing the traffic that's being generated in that area and moving through that area onto many roads so that you don't just create one big, highly trafficked road that becomes a nightmare, frankly, for pedestrians and bicyclists to use. Instead, you're creating shorter, slower moving, less wide streets, and you do that through more frequent connectivity. So I think that is why, when we're looking at the urban design perspective, what is being justified by why you're making this new road connection and why you're having these more frequent connections onto Little Patuxent Parkway. And then the safety issue for how that ties with distance from other entry points, that's really a technical decision that the departments have to make when they're reviewing it. One of the things staff can do is reach out to the technical reviewers and kind of ask them some questions about what they're reviewing and what their assessment of that is.
Well, that would be good. Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Dick?
Oh, it's nice to see that you've been with us all evening. I was kind of surprised when you popped up on screen. A couple of things. First of all, you've done a great job of fighting off that Lakeview development. I've heard a lot of compliments for the work you've done. Right next door to it is Woodmere, which seems to be the exact same thing that they're doing at Lakeview. Is there any difference between the two projects? Should we, as a board, take an interest in what's going on with Woodmere?
The difference for Woodmere is in line with our concerns for the Lakeview project. So our concerns with the Lakeview project were very narrowly focused on the way that the building was oriented, how the drive-through wrapped around it, how the landscaping interacted with the parkway and the other buildings, and how those all worked in proximity. The Woodmere site is set back further. Its driveway is hidden behind the building. There's greater pedestrian connectivity between that building and the adjacent office spaces, and the landscaping is better designed to interact with the parkway and the other buildings. So I think from a design perspective, it is a very different project, and it has addressed all of the concerns that we as CA had raised for the Lakeview project.
That's good. Now, could some of that be switched back to the Lakeview project and say, why don't you do what Woodmere's doing? Or?
Well, they are different developers going through their different processes.
Giving them suggestions. The other thing is, of course, you know, I'm constantly concerned about the Dorsey Overlook project. Last thing I saw, they were going to be cutting down a whole bunch of specimen trees. Is there any way we can get in there and save those trees?
The specimen tree consideration in the development manual, the landscape manual and the regulations associated with that. It's a technical review by Department of Planning and Zoning that looks at the site that's being developed, what the zoning and the land use is permitted on that site, what is a reasonable expectation for the use of the site given what it has been zoned as and what is being permitted to be built. And then, if possible, you save the specimen trees. Those are typically specimen trees that are on the exterior of the site, ones that serve as the landscape buffers, things where it's easier to offset a building and kind of stay within the all of the expectations of what we want to be built on that site under the zoning regulations. For specimen trees that are located internally to sites, those really cannot be saved and still achieve the regulatory expectations of what is supposed to be developed there. So instead, they offset that with increased planting requirements,
Okay,
2 for 1 and things like that.
I could be mistaken, but I was under the impression the trees they were talking about are the ones that separate the development from the highway and serve as a buffer. And my neighbors are all concerned about that. So I've been getting phone calls. I just wanted to see if there's anything we could do to save those trees.
Yeah, I'm not, it's been a while since I've looked at the specific site plan. Residents who are concerned about that issue and would like their voice to be heard on that, their best resource is to contact the county through I think we reference, how to reach out to the plan reviewer and our development tracker and raise those points for them to consider, or at least to have an opportunity to discuss with the planner why they can or cannot work for the project plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we are out of time. Does anyone have any last minute questions that?
Oh, not for the development.
Okay. I assume that you're hitting proposed new topics.
I had a question about legislation.
Oh,
Maybe Wes can answer.
questions.
Do you know what happened with the Senate Bill 632? Whether it passed? This concerned health insurance subsidies for nonprofit organizations.
Senate Bill 632.
632.
Yeah, I don't believe I was tracking that one, but I can find out.
Because it looks like there may be something there that could be applicable for either CA or for the village associations. And since healthcare costs keep becoming so much higher and is so much part of what's driving costs up for hiring employees, there might be something there that, if it passed, that we might be able to investigate.
Ashley?
Okay, I'll look into that.
Thank you.
There's House Bill 1247, the property tax for seniors to offset the property tax rate. I was wondering if we have an estimate of what population would be impacted and if we know what impact that would have on our budget. Yeah.
I'll take that. I noted that one. HB 1247.
Yes.
Other than that, the Maryland General Assembly, their session ended on April 11th.
Monday
so we're done
night.
for the season as far as that's concerned. I also know, so I've taken note, Senate Bill 637, 12, and then House Bill 1247. I know that, or I was made aware that last board meeting, there was a question concerning House Bill 93 and any amendments that were made to that bill. I don't know, well, let me back up. I will say that we did not take a position on that bill, as I had stated multiple times. Did not take a position one way or the other, nor did we submit anything in writing concerning amending the bill one way or the other. So I wanted to make that perfectly clear. When I said that that we did not take a position, I did mean that, and there was nothing going on behind the scenes from me or from our lobbyist perspective. So I just wanted to get that on the record. But I will look into Senate Bill 632 and House Bill 1247. I will push out another legislative memo. It'll be the last one for this session, just as a wrap up, and I will include those.
Jimmy?
Yeah, now that you mentioned House Bill 93, real quick question. In your report, and I had raised this the last time you weren't here, the analysis says the bill does not directly impact the CA board. That with that amendment, I mean, it did, according to the sponsor. One, the bill, according to the sponsor, did impact CA Board, but the other, with the amendment that was being proposed in committee, it was only the CA Board. I'm just sharing that with you.
Oh, okay.
So you may want to look into it a little bit more, because.
Well, the bill died, it didn't go anywhere.
Well,
So if it's raised next session, then.
That's what I'm trying to say. You may want to look at it a little bit more, because if that's the way it's going, with the idea being it would go back into the Howard County delegation for a hearing, which you couldn't do that late in the session, so therefore it would die. But if it comes back, the idea was it's just going to be a CA board meeting, a bill. So you need to look at that amendment. I know we don't, I mean, I've seen the amendment. If you haven't, we could share it with you. Okay, thanks.
Proposed new topics. Jess?
Yeah, I wanted to see if we could revisit the tot lot policy to come up with something that addresses the approximately 10, I think it is, sort of unusual tot lots that are around Columbia, so that we have some standards for how to treat those.
Yeah, I think that will be passed on to the next board, so someone else can be in charge of it, but, yeah, I think that makes sense, that we revisit that based on all the conversation. Do you have a proposed new topic?
Well, I just want to follow up on.
No.
Proposed new topic. Yeah. Now, while you're talking about that, it'd be good if the board also addressed and developed a playground policy. That's been something.
Proposed new topic.
Well,
She
you're
already
right.
proposed the topic.
That's
Yeah, I think that's just a wording
That's tot lot.
thing.
Okay. We have one final board meeting in April 28th, 7 p.m. We will have votes on minority business enterprise program policy, the emergency cash reserve funding, and the subcommittee recommendations for the advisory committee. We will continue to discuss the ethics policy. That will be posted April 22nd. Please review and be prepared for that meeting. Thank you, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn. So moved.
Jenny moves.
Second.
Ashley seconds. Any objection?
No.
Thank you.